Hello everyone, this is Mr. Williams talking about story elements again today. This is the second video in this series on storyline, and here we're at rising action, and our main focus today will be inciting incident and conflicts. So back to this roller coaster storyline, you'll notice that we're at the rising action here, the events that create conflict and suspense and build toward a climax, which we'll talk about in another video. Rising action is exactly as it sounds. Picture yourself going up a staircase to go down a slide, or a roller coaster in this case. This idea of as you're going upward, the action rises, the suspense gets built up, you're getting more excited for what's going to happen later, and ultimately something's going to happen that's going to make all that go back downhill to a calmer situation. Rising action's main job is to create those events that there's so much suspense built up that finally something major happens and then you fall down the roller coaster, basically, is what we're looking for in any storyline. So we'll have examples at the end here, but let's talk about what rising action is. So once again, it's the part of the story that builds toward the climax by adding conflict, aka problems or struggles, to the story. And this is an important part of any story because without conflict, there's no story worth reading. Any story that just goes with, I went to school, nothing happened, I went home. It's basically like when your parents ask you how your day was and you said good. That story is not interesting. There needs to be more detail for someone to want to follow along. Now, once we know what we need to know to understand the story, the writer provides the conflict to make the story interesting, and that's where the exposition comes in. The exposition gives us what we know to understand the story, and then the conflict begins, and that's where we start getting more interest in what's going on. Now, teachers will tell you different things here, but I break down my conflicts into 4 types of conflicts. And that last one with the unknown, teachers will break that out into bigger chunks. I'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to keep it at 4 for today. So first of all, if you look at the right of the screen, we have a character versus character conflict. When 2 characters are in conflict with each other and there's a problem between them, like in this case, Calvin's about to get attacked by Hobbes playfully, that's a conflict that's character versus character. Character versus character can also be groups of people, so you have 2 football teams going against each other, or 1 person versus 3 people. That can be a possibility as well. Now, character versus self is when you have an internal conflict. You can't make a decision, emotions, you're having trouble just with a general situation, you're having an internal struggle with whatever's going on. If it's internal within a character, that's character versus self. Now, Calvin and Hobbes is great for character versus society. Calvin doesn't do well in school. He thinks his parents are trying to do things to him, like some strips, they're aliens or they're trying to cause him trouble. So in this picture on the right, anytime he's getting trouble in school because he can't be himself, there's a societal issue there because he's having trouble adapting to what society expects of him. And finally, that part I told you about that is an over-encompassing idea, the character versus the unknown / nature. Basically, if there's a force that someone can't fully understand, whether it's nature or fate, like a higher power, or robots, in the case of technology that we just can't understand. It could be zombies, it can be werewolves, it can be all this other stuff. Basically, items that we don't know what they originate from, and that's the big part of the conflict, figuring out how to solve them. It can even be just not knowing what's going to happen next. All these things count as unknown. And one of the biggest ones is nature. If I'm fighting a natural disaster, in the case of Calvin Hobbes, I'm trying to sled down a dangerous hill and things like this happen, that's a nature conflict. Now, this is actually a short video. After this is just examples so you can practice finding conflict. So after this slide, if you think you're all set, you can leave and just go do whatever you need to do. But let's talk about the items that you need to know for conflict before you do that. First of all conflicts begin with something called an inciting incident, an event that begins the conflict of the story. So some type of event, for instance, let's pretend that in this tiger attack video, Calvin did something to get Hobbes upset. That would be an inciting incident. Whatever causes the conflict to begin, we need to be aware of that incident because it starts everything. Also, make sure you understand your exposition, setting, characters, and situation because it'll help you better understand the conflicts. And as I just said, we'll talk with some examples in the future. And also note this, there are major and minor conflicts. Think Major League Baseball, Minor League Baseball. But in this case, identifying the major conflicts and which conflicts are the most important to the story will help you understand and identify the theme later on. Knowing what the biggest problem is for a character tells us a lot about the character, a lot about the story, and ultimately gives us the meaning or message the author intended at the end. So let's do some Rory stories here to practice conflict. I'm going to read the story, then I'll give you a second to think about what the answer is. You should probably pause after I finish reading so the answer is not given away if you do want to try to figure it out. Here's story number 1. Rory couldn't wait to get outside. As soon as the door opened, he bolted. The cool fall air flew by his fluffy ears as he ran in circles around the yard. He began to circle the yard for the 3rd time when his nose brought him to a halt. He sniffed and looked through the fence. There was his mortal enemy, Mr. Nibbles. The cat hissed and Rory snarled. So we meet again, Rory thought, as he charged his feline foe. In this case, while there may be many conflicts, the major conflict is character versus character. The big driving force of this story is that Rory does not like Mr. Nibbles. So when he sees Mr. Nibbles, he snarls, the cat hisses. This is a character versus character conflict. Here's Rory story number 2. Rory whimpered again. It was time for his walk, but his owners were still watching the television. In a minute, puppy, they kept saying, and continued to watch the bright rectangle on the wall, laughing while Rory pouted. This is so unfair, he thought. All he wanted to do was go outside and play, but he was forced to stay inside and wear a leash whenever he wasn't. There must be a place where I can stay outside all day and chase bunnies, he pondered, as he laid down and waited for his walk. Now in class we often get a debate about the major conflict in the story, because there are a few, but I'm writing down here that it's going to be a character versus society situation. In the second paragraph, Rory wants to go outside, but he's prevented because of leash laws, and laws are created by society. So that's a major conflict in the story. However, if you did say character versus character, because Rory's having a conflict with his owners who won't let him outside, that could be definitely one of them. You could also argue there might be a character versus self conflict here because Rory's pouting and trying to figure out how to get outside. And this is just in general the situation. You could even say there's a character versus environment or nature here because Rory can't get outside because he doesn't have opposable thumbs and he can't open the door. So all these conflicts are here, but one of them has to be the major conflict, or maybe multiple, but you do need to use whatever you think is the major conflict to figure out what the message is of the story. Here's Rory story number 3. The thunder clapped loudly as Rory dashed under the table. Here I am safe, he surmised, but another loud boom made him quiver even more. Mr. Williams ran to Rory and kept petting him softly, but Rory would have none of it. Outside the world was crashing down, and it was only a matter of time before they would all perish in the mighty storm. Ultimately, this is a mix of character versus nature and character versus the unknown. To us as humans that we can make inferences, we know it's just a thunderstorm outside, and that's nature. But Rory as a dog may not understand what that loud noise is, and that could be an unknown to him. But either way, we're in that category. It's a character versus unknown / nature. You could argue there's a character versus self here if Rory's not able to figure out what to do to keep himself safe, but overall the nature creates the situation that makes Rory have to make a decision. Here's your final example, Rory story number 4. It had finally happened. Rory was coming to school. Mr. Williams' students had all earned A's for the final term, and Mr. Williams, true to his word, had brought Rory on the hour-long drive to school. Rory stepped out of the car and was approached by 30 small humans. The smell of perfume and Axe body spray was overwhelming. Rory couldn't decide what to do. Should he run? Should he stay? He whimpered. He only had seconds to make his decision. And you may have guessed this by process of elimination, but this is the one for Rory versus self, or character versus self. Should he stay and should he run are both internal conflicts. He has to make a decision. There is a character versus character situation, Rory versus the 30 students, but overall it's character versus self. I hope you found this information useful. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. But thanks for watching.